Hey Josh,
Hello there, Ryan. We're live.
we're live. Today, my goal, Josh, is to not be petty.
Oh, okay.
I don't want to be petty. We're not going to defend ourselves in a petty way today.
We're going to defend ourselves, though. Not defend ourselves, but just explain ourselves as
We are
best as we
going to
can.
explain today. Well, Josh and I were just having this conversation before we started recording that people are not consistent with their logic
Mm.
when it comes to the infallibility and the inspiration of the scriptures,
Yeah,
particularly
online.
Americans. Yeah. Oh, okay.
Online Americans. Yeah.
AOL, Americans online.
Americans online.
I remember AOL.
Dude, yeah. Dial up.
So,
Yeah.
but why don't you explain, Josh? You can
Yeah,
take it
so
away.
we're
Take it
we're
away.
talking about we're going to talk about lightning. Um And I know that just seems weird to just have a single episode about lightning. Okay, why? What does that have to do with anything? It has to do with it really is important though. Like the topic and the word has spurred on, you know, what we think about hermeneutics and inspiration and translation and all this stuff. But long story short, I was online, where all bad things begin. I was on Instagram, and there's a channel that shares like creative Bible, like video shorts.
Biblically accurate
Right. It's kind of
visualizations.
yeah, because I love the biblically accurate stuff. So so I saw one of those videos, and it's kind of like goes back to the angels, biblically accurate angels thing that I was on a kick
That's
for
actually
a
in my
while.
outline today. We will
Yeah,
get to the angels today. So
yeah. There you go. If you know, you know.
I will upset some people today.
But the video had to do with Elijah and the prophets of Baal, and I think everybody knows this story if you've grown up in church or you know read the Bible at any length. This is a very very popular story, and I think that's why it rubbed some people the wrong way when we gave an opinion on it. Um, there's the story goes that Elijah is going to have a showdown with the prophets of Baal. So we have the prophet of Yahweh and we have the prophets of Baal, and it's this showdown, this UFC match of the ages. Um, they're on top of this mountain. We've talked about mountains and the significance of that. And the whole deal is, hey, whoever's God answers by fire. They built an altar, and whichever God answered their prayers and lit the altar on fire, that was the boss God. And so the Instagram post had this, like AI generated imagery, and it's like, what people think of when they read this story about the fire of God coming down and lighting the altar, and it's like this, I don't know, like just this like goofy looking picture, and then it's like what really looked like, and it's like this huge tornado of fire coming out of the sky, and it's like lighting the altar on fire, and so it's cool,
Yeah.
it's fun to challenge people's preconceived ideas. Is so I thought I would do the same, and so I went into the comment section, and I didn't pick a fight or anything. I was just like,
And that was your first mistake,
right,
Josh.
yeah, yeah. Going, my
I
first
went into
mistake
the
is going.
comments
I went
section.
into the comment section, and you just look at people's comments, and you're like, okay, what do people really think about this? And so I just politely just gave an opinion. I wasn't like, oh, you guys are all wrong, and this is not right, and blah blah. I was like, hey, like some people think that the fire of God in quotations was actually lightning, and that there's historical and cultural significance in the story that would lead to it being lightning that hit the altar, which lit the altar on fire. Like,
Right.
so I wasn't changing
So there's
any.
still fire in the story.
Yeah, I wasn't changing any DNA of the story. I was just saying, hey, this little detail is kind of interesting because,
Yeah.
um, some of the things that we'll talk about tonight, the cultural context of it, and it being with Baal and who Baal is. Um, but man, the you thought I had literally started a fire, and people were running around like commenting
Hey,
like
we didn't start the fire.
it was always
It
burning.
was always burning.
But anyway, like people were like, what do you mean lightning? Like the Bible doesn't say it that Elijah asked for lightning. And I'm like, yeah, I know it doesn't say that explicitly, but I was like, we're going to talk about why I think that or why we think that. But it was like, oh, you're changing the Bible. You're saying things that the Bible doesn't say, and that's dangerous. And like it just seemed like the more. And Ryan actually jumped in the comments. I tagged him in the comments, and he was like, yeah, this is like a thing, that scholars have pondered. And
Well, I don't like picking fights, but like
right.
when you see your buddy in a fight, you gotta,
you gotta help out.
Get in there.
And it was not like none of it was like, oh, you're wrong and throwing insults or anything. But
I want to make it clear for the audience that my life philosophy is to never engage on social media.
Yeah, Ryan
ever
is never
for
on
any
social
reason.
Media. I'm the one that's usually like throwing my little 2 cents in there and seeing what happens. But
since we've started this podcast, I have made like 2 exceptions to that. One was because somebody asked about the Trinity in Genesis 1, let us make man in our image.
Yeah.
And I was like, I know the answer to this. And it was on it was on, I don't remember what page it was, but it was like, I knew they weren't going to argue with me. I was like, hey, here's why people think that. Yeah. Oh, thank you. I was like, this was great. This was the best social media interaction that's ever. But then I think my second exception was this one. And I regret it.
And
a little bit.
No, it's good. It's spurred on these topics that I think people need to understand. And so what started as just a, hey, here's an opinion, has led to, man, I think a lot of people and a lot of Christians see the Bible in a really faulty way and read the Bible in a really surface level. And I think we have to, like, Ryan, why don't you say what we're not saying?
Well, yeah. So if you're not picking up on it yet, the topic of this episode is really going to be hermeneutics, right? In case anybody doesn't know what that means, it is just it deals with how you interpret and understand text, but it's you can use it for any book, but it especially applies to the Bible. Typically, you'll hear about this like in Christian circles.
Right.
So it's dealing with interpretation, and we have to remember that, like Dr. Ron Johnson said this when we interviewed him. Mm-hmm. When we're reading the Bible in English, everything is an interpretation,
right?
And he had that whole story about, well, Nebuchadnezzar saying the fourth man looks like the son of a god, or a son of God.
The son of God.
Yeah. And
that's what I had always read, and I was like, oh, it's Jesus? Like,
yeah.
It's like, no, it doesn't say that at all.
So if you haven't, go listen to our episode with Dr. Ron Johnson about the Divine Council worldview.
Right, yeah.
But that's a perfect example because, like, I think in English we take things for granted, especially if you don't spend time studying this. It's kind of like when you go to a nice restaurant, you buy the food, you eat it, the food tastes great, but it's different when you cook a meal for yourself and you're like, man, like this is good. Like I know what went into this.
Yeah.
Does that analogy kind of make sense?
The hard work that it takes and the skill
so like people don't realize that even down to individual words or like vowels, like literally, does this word have this vowel or this vowel?
Or that
like you're talking about a single character,
right?
Can people write their entire theses, getting their PhDs and stuff on this stuff?
Mm-hmm.
And it's not simple. People who write translations, they have a very, very difficult job, and it's very involved. And so we who are not educated in how that process works and what these ancient languages say and the context of it, we kind of take that for granted.
Right.
And that gives birth to some bad theology. And this is where y'all are really going to think we're heretics. If the lightning thing isn't going to tick you off, you might get upset if I tell you that I think a lot of Christians have a bad relationship with the Bible. I think that it's funny because on one hand, I think that we've lost some of the myth, some of the spookiness and the mystery and the spookiness isn't the right word, but it is a mythology. There's gods and there's angels and there's
right.
But on the other hand, we've also kind of mysticized the Bible beyond what it actually is.
Right.
And
that gets into the topic of inspiration. What does that mean?
Right. So the way that I think of it, and actually this is the way it was explained to me, is the Bible, Biblia, it's from a Greek or a Latin word, right? Greek word.
Latin,
See,
yeah.
Y'all are going to think we don't know what we're talking about now because I can't even remember off the top
Latin
of my head.
books, the book.
But the book, yeah. So it's a collection of books, just like when you write a paper and you have to cite your sources, right? If you've ever done a research paper in school and you have to have a bibliography, that's your list of sources, right? So the Bible is a list of sources. It's a collection of books, and these books were written by humans.
Right.
And they were written in Hebrew and in Aramaic and in Greek. And they're written over 1,000 years, and the authors are from different parts of the world and different social and economic conditions and
cultures, languages,
different cultures,
different everything.
Yeah, and that culture, part of that culture that we have to remember is religious cultures, different gods, different systems of worship, different systems of sacrifice, and So anyway, all that is to say that we want to, in one sense, kind of demystify the Bible, to say that
when it comes to translation and interpretation and stuff like that, we need to figure out,
because like Josh said, one of the arguments we got was, well, are you saying, and this is where we kind of get into what we're not saying, right?
Yeah. So just to clarify, we submitted, hey, the fire of God, in quotes, was probably lightning, is what we said.
Right.
It was probably lightning, and we'll give the reasons why we think that. But the Bible says fire, the fire of God.
It uses the word fire. And so people responded, it says fire.
Yeah, they're like, it says fire. Why would you say it's lightning? That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. And then even some people went as far as to say, no, the Hebrew word there is aish, and it means fire. If they wanted to say lightning, they would have used a word for lightning, and the word that typically came up was barak. Okay.
Barak,
so we're going to explain what those words mean in a little bit.
Yeah.
But when people translate the Bible into English, it's one thing to say that the authors of the Bible were inspired by the Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
And that is to say that they were guided by the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit, in modern Christian terms, right, put something on their heart.
Right.
And they had to find the way to communicate it to their community, right?
With the faculties and the knowledge that they had, and the limited knowledge that they had.
Right. And
that's why the Bible doesn't have answers for every single modern idea. It's working in its own context.
Right. God is communicating, and these people, these authors, are communicating to the people that live with them. They're not communicating to us directly, right? Obviously, the Bible applies to us. But when people say, in this case, when we say the fire of the Lord fell and consumed the altar and the sacrifice, and we're talking about, a battle between gods, in the historical context, there's room for this to be lightning. And I'm not trying to skip ahead. We are going to explain all that in a second.
Yeah.
But what I am going to say is that I think we've done this before, but you don't think about how did the Bible come into existence? Like, do you think that Isaiah went to sleep one night and woke up and there was a scroll next to him? And, or do you think like his eyes rolled back in his head and he went into a
Hmm.
trance and like,
Yeah, what's the pagan
yeah,
thing of
automatic writing.
automatic writing? Yeah, they're
Yeah. So
overcome by the
that's a
spirit and
form.
write.
Yeah. That's a form of channeling.
I think that's what
Um,
most Christians maybe they don't actively think that, but subconsciously they're like, oh
yeah.
yeah, like the Spirit of God really wrote this. It's like
Yeah.
no, people wrote it.
Right.
Like,
Well, and I know that like because you read stuff in Isaiah or in Ezekiel or the book of Revelation, um, the writers say, "Then I saw," or
hmm
"Then the Spirit took me to,"
yeah,
and you have this picture that like they're physically there, physically
hmm
seeing these things, and then you kind of rationalize it, and maybe I'm the only one. I think everybody kind of has their version of what I'm about to say,
hmm
but so like they're seeing this thing, and then you think, well, they can't physically be there because like was John in heaven with the angels floating around and like
hmm
he was being zapped all over the earth and he saw this angel floating in the middle of the sky and
yeah,
like
with a bunch of
so maybe
eyes.
maybe it was like a vision, right? And we think of visions as like kind of the like hocus pocus Star Wars, like you go into a trance and you see
Right.
your eyes stop working and your mental
Yeah.
your mental eye starts working. And
Right.
so anyway, I just want to propose that like that's not necessarily how this worked. Like John, when he says he saw certain things in Revelation, he's using quotes from the Old Testament, like the living beings with four faces are referenced from Ezekiel 1 and 10.
Right.
The number of years, like the number of days, the 1260 or whatever it is, and the names that he uses for God, they're from the book of Daniel, and uh, like the lampstands and the two witnesses and all this stuff that's from the book of Zechariah. And
Yeah, it's
so
all
like
from the Old Testament.
he's using these biblical things
He's
and
being inspired by the Old Testament to write what he's writing.
exactly. And so
Uh,
he had some message from God, and the way that he encoded it was to use these symbols that everybody would have recognized. So
mhm.
go listen to our episode with Dr. Matt Halstead,
Yeah, yeah, great episode.
um
And you can
anyway,
think of it being inspired, like, if you read a book. Let's say you read a book, and the author has given you all these details in the book about the characters and about the plot and the storyline and the ending and all this stuff. And then you're so inspired by this. Let's say you're a musician, and then you're like, I want to write a song about this book. And you go and you write this elaborate song. You were inspired by the book to write this beautiful song. And you wrote the song.
yeah,
Like, you wrote it in your own experience. However you play the guitar or play the piano, however you sing and what pitch you sing, it's kind of like that. I guess
right,
I don't know if that's a good analogy or not, but
right. And we're
people
not
were inspired by God to write the scriptures in a way that he wanted them to write them in their own experience and in their own words.
yeah. But and so like a good example is Dr. Matt Halstead brought this up that like do you think John had a vision and literally saw a woman sitting on the back of a beast with seven heads and seven mountains? Or do you
Yeah,
think he knows like, hey, if I say the city of seven mountains and the beast with
right,
seven heads,
right,
everybody's going to know I mean Rome?
right,
And
right.
do you think an angel told him the number of this dude is 666? Or do you
Mm,
think he was like, everybody's going to know I'm talking about Nero or whoever
hmm
it was?
Yeah, yeah.
Like both are possible,
Hmm.
and so I'm not ruling out visions, but I'm just saying like I don't think people practically think through how the Bible literally came into existence,
Right.
you know. So that is to say, the context and the language that was used to write the books, um, it's not all one for one in
Yeah.
21st century English, you know. And so when these people online are saying, "But the word is fire," it says
Yeah.
fire. It's like, okay, slow your roll.
Yeah. So we went on there. And it's
Like,
like, well, we think it's lightning, and we'll tell you why. And they're like, but how do you get that when it says fire? Like, the Bible literally says fire.
right,
I'm like, no, it doesn't literally say fire, because the Bible wasn't written in English, right? We
right,
know that. we don't think about that sometimes. We just read our Bible and we're like, oh, it says what it says, you know? That's
Yeah.
what's that phrase that all the Southern churches like, the Bible says it and I believe it.
Yeah.
And that settles
Yeah.
it. It's like, no, not really.
And that works. Like that works for
Yeah,
some
yeah. I
people,
know what they're
you know?
saying. Yeah.
And this is again, like we need to kind of clarify what we're not saying, but like
Right, right, right.
one of the concerns was like, well, if you change a word here or there, you end up changing the whole Bible, and
Right. And I
you end up compromising the message, and
we
and
understand that fear
right,
because we don't want people to change, what the Bible teaches.
right,
Maybe not what it says, but what it teaches, the doctrines that it teaches.
right,
But yeah,
and so we're not trying to set a bad precedent here. We're not trying to say like every time you disagree with something, you can just reinterpret it,
right.
or
Yeah,
every
for
time
sure.
something is confusing, you can reinterpret it. Kind of like the Genesis 6, like the sons of God, or where they had to be humans, like they didn't have to be
Hmm.
humans. Or Psalms 82, God stands among the council of the gods, right? Like,
Hmm.
I mean, there's disagreement on that, and that's pretty significant how you interpret that.
Hmm. Well,
And there's all,
even Dr. Johnson was talking about the word angel. It's like that
yep,
was a made up word.
yep.
Like the Bible doesn't literally say angel.
The English word
Right.
angel.
Right.
Yeah,
The
yeah,
English
yeah.
word angel. He's like, it doesn't say angel there. It says messenger in the original language in Hebrew.
Right,
And so
right.
it's
So
like, yeah,
I love the way that he explained that too. He's like, you're owed the word messenger.
right.
You get the word angel and it has all this baggage.
Because they wanted to differentiate from just a regular messenger
Right.
and a messenger that was probably a spiritual being.
Yeah.
So they came up with angel from Angel. Is it from Angelos or
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
something?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cause we're not trying to say that like the mailman showed up to Samson's parents and told
Right.
them
Yeah.
that,
He showed up with a scroll. Yeah.
like special delivery. um, so yeah, obviously it's not like you can't, this is how you end up with all these different cults and stuff. Like every time I don't
Oh
understand
yeah. Yeah.
something in the Bible, or every time I disagree with something, I'm just going to reinterpret it. That's not what we're saying.
Right.
But like, you don't realize, if you, again, you're taking this for granted, the work that goes into translating the Bible
Right.
into English
Right.
or into any language.
Right.
Um, like,
And Hebrew is very unique.
right,
A very
right.
unique language.
It,
There's. Why don't you explain, like, because we think, I think the closest language that people know in America is like Spanish.
yeah, yeah. Well, and we're in Louisiana, so the South. A lot of people down here speak Spanish, right? I guess a lot of people everywhere speak Spanish,
Yeah,
but
Spanish is all over now. Yeah,
but you learn that like escuela equals school, right?
yeah.
Or azul equals blue.
Hmm.
And I hope I'm remembering that right from my high
Yeah,
school Spanish class.
yeah.
But
Baño means bathroom.
right, right,
You're like, what's the word that I need to learn to say this?
yeah, and that's how we learn that translation works. So then when you go to the Bible and you say, "Oh, this is the word for fire,"
Right.
like this word equals fire.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, not necessarily,
Right.
right? Right. So that's the first thing you got to understand. So what we're saying here, and I've got 1 Kings 18 pulled up. What we're saying is that the word is Aish in Hebrew. It's spelled Es.
Do you
Okay.
want me to read? Let's read the actual thing that says the fire of God or whatever, just so
Yeah, yeah,
people know
yeah.
exactly what we're talking about.
I've got the passage pulled up here,
Okay.
and so it says, it's Elijah says, and he's saying, okay, 1 Kings 18.
What verse is it?
I'm looking in 18:23. He says, "Let two bulls be given to us, and let each party choose a bull for themselves, and let them choose a bull for themselves, and cut it to pieces, and lay it on the wood, and put no fire to it." So that's the first. There's that word fire, and he
Hmm.
means fire. Okay,
Right. Right. Like
um,
literal flames of fire.
right. And I will prepare the other bull and lay it on the wood, and put no fire to it.
Hmm.
Fire, right?
Mhm.
and you call upon, verse 24, you call upon the name of your God, Baal, okay? And I will call upon the name of the Lord, and the
Mhm.
God who answers by fire,
Mhm.
he is God.
Mhm.
I think it's
So
interesting.
up to this point, the
Yeah,
word
he's talking
fire
about
here,
fire.
we say, okay, flames of fire, like on a candle or a fireplace, actual
Yep.
fire.
Yep.
All right.
And so they do it. Each party picks a bull. The Baal prophets chop it up. They do their little ritual. Elijah
Mhm.
starts, loud capping them.
He
Oh,
does, bro.
maybe he's sleeping or he's
He's
relieving
he's
himself. Like,
taking a dump.
yeah. So they
He
start.
says, yeah, he says it with verse 27, yell louder.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
love that. That's so great.
The sass was strong here. I mean,
Bro,
the
Elijah
smack
was
talk.
he was sassy.
Uh, so then it's Elijah's turn.
No, but look at verse 28. It says, so they yelled louder.
Yeah.
That's funny.
And they cut themselves until
Yeah, like
blood gushed out
ritual
upon them.
cutting, mutilation. Yeah,
Yeah,
crazy.
so then it's Baal's turn. He builds an altar with 12 stones. Um and he puts the wood and the pieces of the bull on the altar. He says, "Fill 4 jars with water," in verse 33.
Yeah,
Pour it
so
on
Elijah's doing all that. Yeah.
Yep. Yep, pour it on the burnt offering and on the wood. And then he says, "Do it again." So this is now
Mm,
8 jars. 8 jars of water.
it's a lot of
He
water.
says, "Do it a third time." Okay, so that's 12
Jeez.
jars.
Good
And it
God.
says, "Water ran around the altar and filled the trench also with water." And then he cries out to the Lord. He prays. He says, "O Lord God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known to this day. Let it be known this day that you are God in Israel, and that I am your servant, and that I have done all these things at your word. Um, Answer me, O Lord. Answer me, that this people may know that you, O Lord, are God, and that you have turned their hearts back." Then it says, this is now verse 38. So this is it. This
Mhm.
is where we start nitpicking. Then it says, "Then the fire," and it's the word fire, same
Mhm.
word that was being used earlier.
In English, yeah.
"Then the fire of the Lord fell and consumed the burnt offering and the wood and the stones and the dust, and licked up the water that was in the trench. And when
Mhm.
all the people saw it, they fell on their faces and said, 'The Lord, he is God, the Lord, he is God.'" And then Baal, he said, "Seize all the prophets, let no one escape." And then they took them out to the river and they slaughtered them, right?
Mhm.
So this is where we start splitting hairs, because here it says, "Then the fire of the Lord," and it's the same word, it's Aish.
As all
The
the other times of fire before.
Right. It
Right.
says, "Then the fire of the Lord fell and consumed the burnt offering." So what we're saying is, and we want to be very specific because we tried to explain it to these people online. We
Yeah.
in this message thread, and we were like,
There's only
we're
so
not
much you can
saying,
type. Yeah.
yeah, we're not saying that word fire should say lightning. We don't think that this should say the lightning of the Lord fell and consumed the altar.
Yeah.
That's silly, right? Like, you don't see lightning consuming, like, and one person even said it's fire because when they sacrificed, they put fire on the altar. They never
Right.
used lightning to burn up a sacrifice. And it's
Right.
like, duh.
Yeah. Well, yeah, we know that.
Like, yeah. So, but when it says that the fire of the Lord fell,
Mhm.
we're saying the vehicle.
Mhm.
Like, if you looked up at the sky,
Mhm.
which would have had no clouds, by the way, and that's going to be important
And
later.
we'll talk about that. Yeah.
Yeah. So there would have been no clouds. Elijah prays, and then the altar is lit. So we're saying the vehicle, if you
Mhm.
were standing there watching it, you would have seen lightning, one or more strikes of lightning on the altar that would have ignited it and
Ignited the
burned
fire.
up
So
everything.
we're
So
saying the end is fire, the means is lightning
right,
that God
right.
used.
And we're saying that it's all, you're like, well, then they should have said the word lightning, or they, and like we can even go into like in
Why
the
would they
historic.
be so stupid and say fire when they know what lightning is? They know what
Yeah,
lightning looks like. They have a word for lightning.
yeah. So exactly. So why don't we look at the words real quick? You want to do that?
Yep.
Let's just point out. So this is what we were saying. It's not like, if you know Spanish to English, it's not like, gato equals cat. Hebrew is a very descriptive language.
It's a descriptive language. That's what I was going to say. Let's look at the word Aish first.
Yeah. And so the error with saying when Josh goes through these words for fire in a second, the error was saying they have a word for fire and they have a word for lightning, and they chose the word for fire.
And both are wrong.
Yeah, the error is that there is more than one word in Hebrew that
right.
can mean fire in English.
Right.
And there's also more than one word in Hebrew that can mean lightning. And there's also more than one word that can mean both.
Right.
Okay. The word aish, if you do a literal translation, like we're about to go through Strong's Concordance just because it's easy, but if you use Strong's or if you use like a King James Bible or some literal translation of the Bible, that word is always going to be fire. So what we're saying is, in context, the fire of the Lord falling, the vehicle, that image is lightning. And it says the fire fell and consumed. So this is all kind of one image. The fire is the whole thing. They would not have said lightning struck and then lit a fire and the fire burned everything up. It's all one picture. The fire of the Lord fell and consumed. And that kind of goes into, we can talk about it more in a little bit, but they would not have delineated, like we know scientifically lightning is different from fire. They would not have made that distinction necessarily.
Right.
But
like
yeah,
we would say, like lightning is an electrical charge in the atmosphere and blah, blah, blah. Yeah.
Right.
So yeah, aish.
Go for it.
We've read this word so many times in the past month talking about this topic. But okay, so aish, the word that's translated to fire in almost every translation except one, I think. I think the Message Bible, which is not really even a translation, it's a paraphrase. That one says lightning. And I hate the Message. Well, but I think it got it right on that one.
Yeah, that's a different verse, though.
Oh, is it? Okay.
Yeah. That's 2 Kings 1, which we're going to bring up in a second.
Gotcha. All right,
so it kind of does prove our point.
Yeah, it does. Aish does not... It can mean fire. It can. But it doesn't just mean fire. It's more like Ryan was saying, it's more of a descriptive word of fire. Like you would say the fire is hot, the fire is bright, the fire is illuminating or sparkly or smoky or whatever. So a lot of those words that it translates to is blazing, burned, burning, burning coals, fiery, fire, fires, flame, flaming, flashing. Yeah. So that's it's describing fire, right?
Yep.
Like he was saying, there's not always a 1-to-1 correlation that aish means fire, flames all the time. No, it doesn't. It's descriptive. It's describing the properties and the qualities of fire.
Yeah. And one thing that's interesting is I'm on blueletterbible.com. They're using it says Strong's H784. So that's the identifier for this word.
Yeah.
And they have the Brown's Driver Briggs lexicon, and they actually point out that one of the uses of aish is supernatural fire, attending theophany, which is an appearance of God, right?
Right.
And it says, it actually says, here we go, like Job, look, 2 Kings 1:14, that's the verse you were just talking about.
Yeah.
Job 1:16, which we'll read in a second. But it says, perhaps lightning intended. Compare further with lightning in Exodus 9:23, Psalms 18, Psalms 148. So you see that this is it's supernatural fire accompanied with an appearance of God, a theophany, and it's used in places where lightning could be in view.
Right.
So why wouldn't they just use the word for lightning?
Right.
And the answer is because that's not how translation works. Like in that context, in that culture, in that language, they had no problem associating that image of what we think of as lightning with fire.
Right.
So
because it's flashing light coming out of the heavens and it's setting fire to things that it touches. Like, so they look at the whole scenario, and they're like, "Oh my gosh, fire! That's fire!"
Yeah.
Like,
So
uh,
I think even I think you told me like in researching this that like in a lot of cultures, didn't they consider those sacred places when they found a lightning strike?
uh,
Uh,
yeah, I think so. It was like on top of mountains and stuff.
yeah,
And we even shared on our Instagram like a volcano that was erupting, and you can give the scientific stuff because I don't know all that. Supposedly, when volcanoes erupt, there's a high potential for lightning to strike in that area or something.
yeah.
Uh,
The dust makes static charge in the air.
there you go. Yeah.
We're actually going to revisit the science in a second because that's really interesting.
So
Um,
we shared this video of a volcano erupting, and lightning is just like going
just
crazy
cooking the
on
top
top
of
of
the
this.
mountain.
Yeah, it's going crazy. And we share, we're like, this is probably what Elijah saw. Elijah and the prophets of Baal probably saw something like this, on top of a mountain, the significance of the mountaintop. That's where the gods are. That's where you go to meet with them. That's where they show up. Um, but yeah, it would have been an awesome
Yeah.
sight.
So
Uh,
let's.
yeah,
You want to read some of these verses real quick?
yeah, we can.
Um, that these are all verses that use the word aish, but they could mean lightning. And it's like it's right here. I'm reading from the lexicon. We have found multiple commentaries that have this. So like, and I think we tried to explain to people online, like they were like, well, y'all are, somebody was like, people like you guys are always trying to shake things up and, like you don't want to stick to the Bible and, you want to find something different. And it's like, no, like we're not making this up. Like this is not a new thing.
Yeah,
Um, well, let's start with, since you mentioned Second Kings 1:14, do you want to look that up? And
yeah,
I'll pull up Job 1.
yeah. So Second Kings 1:14 says that you can read it for yourself to get the context of what's going on, but it says, "Look, fire has come down from heaven and burned up these people." So there's like a judgment moment where God is sending quote unquote fire to kill these people.
Right. Right.
Um,
And the context for that is Elijah is being um is about to be, well, Ahab sends soldiers to arrest him and they call him a man of God. And he says, if I'm really a man of God, let fire from
Let
fall from
fire come
heaven,
down. Yeah.
and that's the one that you said the Message translation actually says lightning.
Lightning.
They
Yeah.
actually did it, like, which is, again, I don't like the Message,
Well,
but
it's just
yeah,
one guy.
well, he got that part right at
He
least.
did. Yeah. Um, and Ryan, we even have this in our modern language today. I know we've talked about this, like when somebody says something that sounds blasphemous, or they're like making a joke about God or something, we're like, "Ooh, I better get away from you because lightning's going to hit you."
Yeah, yeah,
Like this picture of God's judgment. What did Briggs and Driver say about supernatural fire attending theophany? Like
yeah,
God's going to show up and do something crazy.
yeah.
He's going to judge people. You better stand back.
So here's another one. This is in Job. Obviously, Job chapter 1 is where all the bad things start happening.
Hmm.
Well, it's where all the bad things happen. The rest of the book is about his response, right? So Job 1:16, it says, while he was yet speaking, there came also another servant and said, the fire of God, there's our phrase again,
Hmm.
the fire of God is fallen from heaven and has burned up the sheep and the servants and consumed them, and only I am left, and I escaped to tell you.
Yeah.
And so they're saying that fire of God here could be lightning.
Yeah. And it's still that same word, Aish.
Yeah.
The fire of God has come out of the heavens and has burned up and killed everything.
Yeah. And they have Exodus 9:23 listed here, which do you want to do that one? I find that one maybe the most compelling.
And Moses stretched out his rod toward heaven, and Yahweh sent thunder, and hail darted to the and thunder and hail. I'm reading the interlinear, so it might sound a little weird, but it's from the actual Hebrew. So yeah, Moses stretches out his rod, and it says that God sent thunder, hail, and it says that he darted fire to the ground.
Yeah. So that's not even using our phrase, the fire of God. It
Right.
says
So yeah, the
fire
fire of
darts to the
God
ground.
fell. Yeah.
Yeah. What if you're in a hailstorm and you're talking about fire darting to the ground and across
Right.
the earth?
Right.
That's lightning, right?
Right. Yeah. The context is weather, thunder,
Yeah.
hail, rain, lightning goes with that.
Yeah.
Now,
Psalms.
can God send an actual pillar of fire down to the earth during a hailstorm? Sure, he can do
Yeah.
whatever he wants.
Yeah. And
But
that's
why? Why would
and
he do that?
that's another thing is people kept getting hung up on that. They're like, well, fire is it's a miracle. It's a miracle. And it's like, yeah, but like there's reasons he would have sent thunder too. So we're almost there, everybody. We're about to explain that.
Yeah.
But yeah, God obviously could do whatever he wanted, but we think this is in here for a reason. Psalms 18,
Hmm.
which actually David quotes this in 2 Samuel somewhere, but
Psalm 18:13.
yeah, so
Yeah.
I'm actually going to back up a little bit so that we get the whole picture. Um, Psalm 7, this is talking about him crying out to God and he heard his voice.
Mm.
And it says, then the earth shook and trembled, the foundations of the hills. I'm starting at verse 7. The foundation of the hills moved and were shaken because he was wroth. This is King James. Because he was angry. Okay.
Hmm.
Let's change it to
Paraphrase. He
I
was
like
pissed.
the ESV.
Yeah.
So because he was angry. Okay. Smoke went up from his nostrils. So we have smoke here.
Hmm.
And devouring fire from his mouth. Okay. So we have smoke and fire. Okay. Glowing coals flamed forth from him. So these are all of this imagery looks like fire, right?
Hmm.
We're not going to argue with that. And then we have he bowed the heavens and came down, or bowed the heavens and came down. Probably bowed,
Yeah.
bent, right? He bent the heavens.
Right. He bent it. Yeah.
Thick darkness was under his feet. Let's see. Yeah, so thick darkness was under his feet. This line, a similar line, is used a couple times here, and it's important the context because think about if you're looking up, if you're in a storm, like we're describing a storm now. There's an earthquake, there's fire. If you look up, you would see a cloud, and the idea is that God is on the cloud, right?
Hmm.
So
Cloud rider.
So exactly. Thick darkness was under his feet. This says he rode on a cherub and flew. He came swiftly on the wings of the wind. That's you could do a whole episode on that right there because that's polemic
Yeah.
as well against some of the ancient Near Eastern gods. Him riding a cherub.
And if you're
He
listening
made
to this and you haven't heard our other episodes, polemic is you're countering an idea that was around at the time.
right. It's like
almost like a
you're taking a jab at
what do they
somebody
say?
else's.
What do they say in court when they have an object? I object.
Yeah, yeah,
I object.
yeah. And a lot of people don't realize that in the Psalms, especially, but all over the Bible, there's these little jabs at the other gods.
Hmm.
You know, saying that, oh, you think your God's, you know, you think he's the real God. Actually, ours is the real God. So
Hmm.
in this case, it's not Baal or Marduk or anybody that's coming down from heaven on a cherub. It's Yahweh, right?
Hmm.
It says he made darkness his covering, his canopy around him, his thick clouds dark with water. So now we have clouds, right?
Hmm.
Verse 12, out of the brightness before him, hailstones and coals of fire broke through his clouds. And this is where we could start arguing, oh, maybe this is lightning, not just coals of fire. And then verse 13 is the kicker, because this is the one that has the word Aish.
Hmm.
The Lord also thundered in the heavens, and the Most High uttered his voice, hailstones and coals of fire.
Hmm.
And then verse 14 does something interesting. It says he sent out his arrows and scattered them. He flashed forth lightnings and routed them. And that kind of reminds me of our Genesis 8 episode, or Genesis 9, when we talked about the rainbow. If you have this image of God wielding a bow, a weapon, him shooting lightning bolts kind of makes sense, right?
Yeah.
It's calling his arrows lightning. But
Yahweh did it before Zeus.
Yeah. But see how it's
Thor.
tying. Exactly. You
Yep.
see how it's tying in all this fire imagery and storms, the coals and the, you know, like you have clouds. And think about too, like if you have lightning in the clouds, they look kind of like coals, right? Like
Yeah, it's
lightning
lighting
lights up
up, yeah.
clouds. So anyway, you have all this fire imagery, and then he's shooting lightning down.
Yeah, he
So there's-
doesn't have a campfire burning in the heavens.
Right.
It's all weather
Right.
imagery and terminology.
So Psalms 18 is a pretty good example of that. That's the word for fire, but it means the commentary is saying that it could be referring to lightning there.
Right.
And you do see the next verse actually says he's wielding lightning.
His
His
arrows is
arrows are
lightning. Yeah.
lightning.
Psalm 148:8. That's another one.
Okay, go for it.
Um, it says fire and hail, snow and clouds, stormy wind. It's all this weather imagery. So you have snow, you have hail, you have wind of the storms in the clouds, and then fire. Aish is mentioned as a part of yeah.
Yeah.
So
Um,
again, it's just verse after verse of like this weather imagery, storms,
right.
clouds.
And we all know, like, when you see a storm, you're not thinking fire, you're thinking lightning. But
Right.
in the ancient mind, there's a connection between the presence of gods, right? Theophany,
Yeah.
the presence of a god and lightning, and it's not uncommon for them to link this idea of fire and lightning. They're not
Right.
shy about using the word fire to describe lightning if that's the thing that they're actually
Right.
seeing.
Fire and lightning were synonymous
Yeah.
and interchangeable.
So I want to show another example that I don't think is in. It's not. It might be in this lexicon entry, but
Hmm.
it wasn't listed with those. Numbers 11. This isn't the one I was just thinking, but actually, Numbers 11:1 is a good one. This is another one. It says the people complained, and the Lord was displeased. And when the Lord heard it, His anger was kindled, and the fire of the Lord burnt among them and consumed them, where they in the outskirts of the camp.
Hmm.
And so you either have like a fire spontaneously combusting and burning up the camp, but
Hmm.
this commentary is saying that could actually be lightning striking people or places in the camp and starting fires, right?
Yep.
And again, it doesn't have to be one or the other. It could be both. Like
Yeah.
this image of the fire burning among them, it could be lightning coming down and fire starting, and that they're using the word fire of the Lord, the
Hmm.
term fire of the Lord, to describe the whole picture,
Yeah,
right?
that's what I was going to say. I'll submit this real quick, but we can get back to it. The fire of God was synonymous with this idea of lightning striking in His judgment, and
Yeah.
it's not just in the Bible; it's in a lot of mythologies. And I think the most famous one is Zeus. Zeus has always been portrayed and always been um, the god of Greek mythology that has wielded the lightning bolt.
Yeah.
And if you've read any kind of mythology, you know the story of Prometheus. Prometheus created humans. Zeus didn't like the humans very much, and so Prometheus wanted to steal, quote, steal fire from Zeus to give it to humans to kind of empower them to create warmth for themselves and kind of this the symbol of power. So it says that Prometheus
Right.
stole the fire of Zeus in a fennel. It was like a fennel stalk or something, but he like hid it away and then gave it to humanity, and then he was punished by Zeus when he found out. But everybody knows, and every scholar and every you know professor of
I mean, if you've ever
mythology
watched
will
Disney's
tell you,
Hercules,
yeah,
like every
if
kid
you've
knows.
watched the movies, you know that Zeus wields a lightning bolt or a thunderbolt, they call
Yeah.
it as well. So you see how even in non-Christian mythology, you have it synonymous that fire and lightning are the same thing.
Right.
It's this weapon that the gods use as their power, and they strike the earth with it.
Right. Right. Um, so since we're talking about gods, I do want to come back to Exodus 19, where the Lord visits Moses and the elders on Mount Sinai.
Hmm.
This kind of goes in the honorable mentions category because people do not say that, because here you have the word for lightning. I think you actually have a couple different words for lightning and fire in this chapter.
Hmm.
So this is definitely one of those situations where it could be both, like tied together.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be one or the other. Um, but I guess I'll go ahead and say it since we're reading these
Yeah.
entries. When Moses goes to Sinai, well, okay, first, actually, let me back up.
Hmm.
Remember the pillar of cloud and the pillar of fire that
Oh
led
yeah.
Israel through the
So
wilderness,
it was
right?
a pillar of lightning, Ryan.
Yeah. So this is the thing, and this is where, again, one of the things we're not saying in this episode is that every time you see the word fire in the Bible, it should be lightning.
Right.
Like, no, that's silly. Like
So how
sometimes
do
it's
we
fire.
determine if it's interchangeable? How do we determine which thing it is?
Yeah, you have to use the C word, context.
Context, right? That's thrown around so much, and I think people lose the context of the word context.
Yep. Yep. And there's specific historical context to this. So,
Right, right.
but yeah, given the context, so in Exodus, um, one of the guys was saying, well, what about the burning bush? That wasn't lightning. And we were like, yeah, like you're right. It wasn't lightning. Would have been kind of cool. Like when it says that,
It's like electrified with
yeah,
like
yeah, the little, what do they call it? Like the little
the
Tesla
little
things,
Tesla coils.
coils, like,
That'd be
zzz,
dope.
So yeah, maybe when Moses said, "Look, there's fire on that bush, but it's not consumed," maybe it
Yeah,
was like it looked like Back to the
electrified, but it
Future or
wasn't
something,
burning. Yeah.
uh, but something and including all this in context. Another thing about the burning bush to remember is it isn't one of the Old Testament images of the Trinity. Like all the people that say the Trinity's not in the Bible.
Hmm.
So the fire that is so first of all, the angel of the Lord is in the bush, right?
Right. Yeah. It says the angel
He
of the
turned
Lord was in the bush.
right, and then it says that the bush looked like it was on fire,
It
but it
was,
wasn't
but it
consumed.
wasn't. It wasn't burning.
And so that presence of Yahweh is the Holy
Hmm.
Spirit.
Right.
Okay, and then you have the Lord, which we would say the Father is speaking,
Yep.
right? And
Yahweh
it
speaks.
changes between the angel of the Lord and the Lord Himself,
Right.
as if they're both speaking the same person, right?
Right. And when we say angel, we're saying a sent
Messenger,
one.
right?
Yeah. Somebody who was sent there.
Right. So that's what Moses saw in the burning bush. Why is that important? That image is important because then, whenever they have the pillar of cloud, or I'll just say the pillar,
Hmm.
leading them in the wilderness, Exodus and is probably another place in the Old Testament, but Hebrews picks up on this that the angel of the Lord, Jesus,
Yeah.
Hebrews says Jesus
Hmm.
led the people out of Egypt.
Hmm.
And so Exodus
That
says
it was
the angel,
Christ.
right, the angel of the Lord was in the pillar. So you have the same thing here. You have the angel, the son, well, we would call the son, but the word of the Lord or the angel of the Lord
Hmm.
is in the pillar. And the pillar itself, the image of fire, is the presence of the Lord. And
Hmm.
so the presence and the power of God goes wherever God is, right?
Right.
Um, and so anyway, it's important to remember that this image, that this is what Moses is seeing. And one person said, I told somebody, well, well, no, like we think it was a pillar of fire. I'm not saying that's lightning, but I also am not opposed to the idea because think about it. Like if it was a pillar of cloud,
Hmm.
um, and then it says it lit up at night to give them, warmth and light, right? Isn't that in there?
Something
Uh,
like that. Yeah.
so
Well, I
anyway,
mean, the
the
idea of
idea
like,
that
yeah, go ahead.
if it's a pillar of cloud,
Yeah,
I suggested that it's a pillar of cloud, and at night it's illuminated by
by the lightning.
lightning, or
Yeah.
or it could be by fire, but maybe there's lightning involved, and I have a reason for that, and we're getting to that in Exodus 19.
Hmm.
And the guy argued with me that it's not one pillar, it's two pillars. There's two different pillars, and this is again where we've talked about eisegesis before, right?
Right. Yeah.
There's things we assume when we read and we
Hmm.
don't pay attention. And if you don't look into it, you'll never know that it's a topic of debate among scholars to this
Right.
day,
Right. Yeah.
whether or not it was one or two pillars. Like we
Yeah.
don't know. We don't know if there was cloud scooting around the desert and then at night it swapped out with a pillar of fire,
The cloud
or
like clocked out, and the fire pillar came in. He's like, "Hey, Jay, have a
exactly.
good day. All right, I'm gonna take
Yeah.
over."
Which is like what most people think.
Like
Like in Sunday
tag
school,
team.
that's how you hear it,
Yeah.
right? But some people do think it was a pillar that was cloud and at night it was illuminated. and so it could just be one pillar. And I almost lean towards that, because whether it was lightning or fire,
I
that's
did
not
too.
why.
Yeah.
But the idea that you had the angel of the Lord in the pillar,
Mhm.
now that I'm going to get to Exodus 19, where it starts to describe the presence of God on Mount Sinai. Okay. So they finally make it to Mount Sinai. Moses goes up. It says he brought forth the people out of the camp in verse 17 to meet with God. They stood at the bottom of the mountain. Okay, it went to King James again. I'm switching to ESV. And then verse 18 says, now Mount Sinai was wrapped in smoke because the Lord had descended on it in fire. The smoke went up like the smoke of a kiln, and the whole mountain trembled greatly. So let's see. There's a part that I'm missing here.
About Yahweh descending in fire.
Well, it gives a it says he descended in fire, and that's the part that I wanted to read. But I'm sorry. Okay, so I didn't back up far enough.
Okay.
In verse 16, Exodus 19:16, it says,
Gotcha.
on the morning of the third day there were thunders,
Mm.
lightnings. So that's the word lightning.
Barak,
Yeah, Barak. So we'll get to that in a second. And a thick cloud. So on the mountain. So thunder, lightning, and a thick cloud. Now remember what was leading them around the wilderness, right?
Mhm.
It was a cloud. The thick cloud was on the mountain, and a very loud trumpet blast, so that all the people in the camp trembled. Okay. So here we have this image of a storm almost, right?
Mhm.
You have thunder, lightning, and thick cloud. Then when it says,
And if
then
it's
when
God, it's a perfect storm.
that was cheesy, so cheesy. Okay, so Moses brought the people out of the camp, and they stood at the bottom of the mountain, and it says, now Mount Sinai was wrapped in smoke because the Lord had descended on it in
fire.
And it's the word fire. But what do you have on the mountain? Clouds and thunder and lightning, and so it could be wrapped in thick smoke because there was fire burning on the mountain. And again, that's the Sunday school. That's the picture that we all get. That's what we all think immediately when we read it. And it's because in English we see fire. But, get your mythology brain out, like we were just talking about Zeus and stuff, or Thor, or any of these gods that are depicted with lightning.
Mhm.
When they descend, what are they associated with? It's lightning.
Yeah.
And
the thing that came to mind is, if you've seen Thor Ragnarok, there's a part in the movie where he's getting beaten by the queen. I forgot her name, whatever the bad.
Is that Hela or Hela?
Something like that. Yeah, something like that. He's getting like kind of held down by her, and then he gets his lightning power, and he like shoves her off, and he like descends down to the bridge. What's the bridge that's in Valhalla or whatever?
I don't remember.
It's like this rainbow bridge or whatever.
Yeah.
And so he's like descending to do battle, and he's coming down, and it's in slow motion. So you see the lightning like streaks almost like coming around him, and it's like helping, like bringing him down, almost like an escalator of lightning. That's what I think of.
Yeah. And so again, this is not a Mount Sinai joke. It's not a hill I would die on.
It's not a mountain we'll die on. Yeah, and none of this has to do with the gospel. None of this is changing the gospel. None of this is, you don't have to believe this to believe the gospel. This is not a gospel issue. It's just, we're saying, hey, if you think about it this way, and if you do hermeneutics and translation this way, it might be a little more significant, and we'll tell you why, because of what Baal is. And maybe, I don't know, maybe you can tell them that now.
Well, I think so. I think let's look here. I think we've made all the points. I hope that we've built a good case that, like, whether or not something is fire or lightning in the Bible. Oh, which we didn't read this word for lightning real quick. Let me just read this entry for Barak real fast. And this is where people would say, well, there's a word for fire and there's a word for lightning. They should have used Barak if they meant lightning.
Right.
Barak is one of like 5 words, by the way, that mean lightning. And none of them, in English, actually mean lightning.
Right, yeah.
They all describe lightning.
Mm-hmm.
And so
remember we were saying that Hebrew is a descriptive language. It's not one for one translation
So let me
sometimes.
let me just pull up lightning here.
Yeah,
We'll
so
get all the
Barak
words
is
for
going to
lightning.
be Strong's 1300.
Yeah. Yeah, you want to
Um,
read it? You have it pulled up?
yeah, Barak. Um, it's the literal translation or definition of it. They have it. It says lightning, of course, at first, and then it says flashing like lightning, flashing, gleaming, glittering, lightning flashes, and lightnings.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
um,
And part of the description here is it says flashing of an arrowhead or flashing of a sword,
right.
right?
Yep.
And so this is it's associated with flashing the way that light flashes off of metal. Like,
Right.
so when you see a lightning flashing in the night sky, they would say, "Oh, Barak, there's a flash of lightning." It's not actually
A
talking
flash
about the
of light.
lightning itself. It's
The
talking
actual
about the
lightning bolt.
flash.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The
And
effects of it.
so that's why in phrases like in when you read Exodus 9:23, it said that there was hail, thunder, lightning, and fire running to the ground.
Hmm.
It can have the word Barak and the word Aish both talking about the same thing, because one is saying flashes,
Hmm.
bright flashes of lightning, and the other is describing the heat, right? Like the
Hmm.
the lightning itself that's causing destruction, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So the ideas are linked. It doesn't. It could mean both, or which I mean, you could see if lightning striking and lighting things on fire, then yeah, we're going to use the word for fire. But
Hmm.
but that
Yeah,
what we're
because I mean,
trying to illustrate
the
here.
ancient person is looking around and they're seeing this light, this supernat to them, which it was
Yeah,
supernatural light coming out of the heavens and lighting things on fire. Like that's
right,
what they're seeing.
right. So that's what we mean when this is not a one-to-one translation. This word refers to flashing or glittering or bright, or
Hmm.
and it gets used for the word. Let's see. This says in the King James, Barak, Strong's H 1300, gets translated to the word lightning, the noun lightning,
Hmm.
14 times. Okay.
Hmm.
But it's used 6 or 7 other times to mean bright, glittery, like,
Hmm.
it actually one time they do translate glittering sword one time.
Yeah,
So
there's a yeah in that movie Boondock Saints. I don't know if you've seen Boondock Saints, but one of the scenes in the movie where they're all going to war, they're all fighting each other. One of the guys gets up and he quotes that scripture. I think it's in I don't
Deuteronomy
remember where it's
32,
at.
I just found it.
Deuteronomy. Yeah,
If I whet my glittering
my
sword.
glistening sword. Yeah, my glittering sword. Yeah, he quotes the whole thing in the movie.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, so it's that descriptive. It's describing what they're seeing.
Yeah, and again, and we're not trying to say when you see the word fire, you should think it's actually lightning. What we're trying to show is that in context, in the Bible, the ideas are connected.
Right.
It's both. Both are in the scene. Okay.
And we're
So
also showing how to do hermeneutics. Not that we're
exactly.
the experts on it, but we've learned from a lot of experts. Like
Exactly.
this is how you do hermeneutics. This is how you figure out what the text is really saying.
Now,
What?
Josh, you this is fun and all. We're doing a
Yeah.
word study. This is
Uh huh.
really interesting and nerdy,
Hallelujah.
and maybe people have not tuned out yet.
Yeah.
But why does this matter at all in the Elijah story?
Right. Exactly. This is why I think it's so important in this story, um, because of who God is combating with. So you have Baal. Baal in the ancient world was a storm god.
Right.
He was literally, and he actually, a lot like Zeus, was depicted holding a bolt of lightning or a thunderbolt. So you can go online and you can look up, statues and sculptures and idols of Baal that they have found. And he always has, it looks like a tree branch, like
Right.
with roots,
Yeah.
but he's holding the lightning bolt and it has the little lightning pieces coming off of it.
Yeah.
And so this is what it makes it important, at least in my mind, um, is that he's specifically using the weapon that was supposed to be Baal's weapon, the lightning bolt, in a sense against him. So I think that gives it a little more weight if we translate that as lightning or understand that as lightning, because it's significant to the story. It's significant to who Baal was and who they knew Baal to be, was this storm god that held the lightning bolt. He was the one that was over the weather and over the storms and over the rain. He was the one that brought rain to, the earth, that made it fertile and grow crops and all this stuff. So that's what makes it more significant to me. And it harkens to the story of Egypt and the plagues of Egypt. Like, those plagues were not random, oh, I'm gonna send frogs on them, that'll be funny. It wasn't like pranked, like
Yeah.
like it wasn't just like pranking the Egyptians with random stuff. Oh, I know, we'll turn the Nile to blood. Like, all of it was significant, and all of it were jabs at all of their deities. And Ryan, you came up, in your studies, you had some really cool stuff about the weather phenomena that was probably going on as well. And I think one more thing is, like, God can do miracles that are like out of the ordinary, for sure. Like, we totally believe that. But I think a lot of times God works through the systems and the designs of his creation that he's made. Does that make sense?
Right.
Like instead of it being a pillar of flaming fire coming down, which would be so out of the ordinary, yes, he could do that. But it would make more sense for him to use what he's created in the context of weather and rain, which you can talk about, and Baal being the rain storm god that holds the lightning bolt. He's saying, no, I hold the lightning bolt. You are not the god over the atmosphere and the rain and the storms. I am.
Yeah, and I like how you mentioned Egypt, because I've heard people preach that before, that each of the 10 plagues was a direct assault against some idea or against a particular god.
And nobody has a problem with that.
Nobody has a problem with that. Michael Heiser, I actually like Michael Heiser says his opinion was that in his book, The Unseen Realm, was that they weren't on any specific god, but against like the entire religious system.
The
that,
pantheon,
like, these were things that the pantheon of gods should have been able to control.
Right.
And Yahweh, being a foreign god, right, not the gods of Egypt, was able to come in and just decimate,
Right.
And
the miracle,
Pharaoh even said, like, who is this Yahweh and why should I care what he says? And God's like, okay, let me show you,
So, glad you asked.
Yeah.
And the miracle is in, like, because they're like, oh, well, if it was just weather, and it was just randomly weather and lightning, that doesn't seem very miraculous. Well, no, it is, because it did exactly at the exact time Elijah called for it.
Right.
Like, that's a miracle.
And so suddenly, whenever we say, well, 1 Kings 17 and 18, where he stops the rain, which we didn't read 17, we didn't give that.
Right. That's what I was going to say. Why don't you give them the backstory of what's going on?
But when we say, well, this is about his judgment against the god Baal and Baal's prophets, suddenly now we're reinterpreting the Bible based on pagan mythology, and it's like, no, like, the Bible, again, Heiser's quote, the Bible was not made in a bubble. Like, you have to understand the historical context. And also, God's not fighting against fictional characters, right?
Right.
Like, these are real spirits who are in rebellion, and people are turning to these spirits. And God says, I love how Elijah says it in his prayer in verse 18, prove to them that their hearts have turned back to you, right? Like, prove that you are God, you sent me, and that their hearts are turning back to you. Like, Elijah was like, this is a done deal,
Yeah.
But before, if we back up, 1 Kings 16 is hilarious, by the way. If you picture it in your head, in your imagination, it starts just by saying that Elijah the Tishbite, right, he goes to Ahab. So he just rolls up at Ahab's house, the palace or whatever, and he says, as the Lord the God of Israel lives, before whom I stand, there shall be neither dew nor rain these years except by my word.
So here's our context starting.
And then
already.
He leaves.
Yeah. Peace out.
It's not going to rain anymore. Bye.
You're screwed. See ya.
So, and it's really interesting because, like you said, like, Baal is a storm god, so he should have been able to control the rain.
Yeah, and how important is rain in
And
the
yeah,
ancient world?
and it also says dew, which I've heard is it could be Baal, but it could also be Baal's daughter. I haven't looked into that, but somebody said that was another family member of Baal when he said neither dew nor rain. It was attacking two specific gods
Mm,
that they worshipped,
mm.
and so obviously they should have been
So
able to
there was a
control the
dew
weather.
god, a dew goddess,
Yeah.
goddess
Um,
of dew.
so and of course the idea here is that this gets it. So Elijah is also, I'm sorry, not Elijah, Baal. Baal is also considered a fertility god.
Right.
And this is a very common connection that storm gods or weather gods were also linked to fertility
Mm-hmm.
because, in their minds, to boil it down simply, rain gets the earth pregnant, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then crops come out of it.
Right.
And so if you please the gods, you'll have lots of rain and good crops, and also your women are going to have babies, you
Mm-hmm.
know, like, and so a lot of Baal worship reflected that, and it
Mm-hmm.
was kind of gross.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll just leave it there.
Yeah.
But anyway, so there's a famine for 3 years, right? Because the rain stops. And so this
Mm.
is also an assault on Baal because since Yahweh has completely just emasculated him.
He's cut the
Um,
water supply.
yeah. So he can't, there's no rain and there's no crops.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so,
And that's a demonstration of his authority over
right,
Baal.
right, that he is truly God.
Right.
Um, and so, you mentioned the actual natural phenomena.
Mm-hmm.
I think another thing people have to consider, I'm going to read an article here from Reasons to Believe, their website. And it is by people who have degrees in this.
Yeah.
This article is by
Yeah. We're not making this stuff up. That's for
yeah,
sure.
Dr. Hugh Henry and Daniel Dyke, who has a master's of divinity, master's of theology. Um, but they're saying in this article on Reasons to Believe that fire from heaven is an ancient designation for lightning.
Mm-hmm.
In the previous chapter, Elijah had declared there'd be no dew or rain. And since rain comes from the clouds, we can infer that this region had not seen clouds for some time. So, how could lightning naturally occur without cloud in the sky?
Mm-hmm.
So, they're calling this a hypernatural miracle. And their point is that obviously
That's
God,
cool. I like that
yeah,
hypernatural miracle.
hypernatural, right? Not
That's cool.
supernatural, hypernatural. So, they're saying in this article that, or in this post, that obviously God could just generate lightning if he wanted
Sure.
to. He could
Yeah.
just snap his fingers and there'd
Of
be
course.
lightning. But there's actually in meteorology, if you study weather, there is a phenomenon called a bolt from the blue,
Mm-hmm.
and it's because it's got that name because you can have lightning strikes multiple many miles away from a cloud.
A cloud
Like
source.
for lightning to work, you have
So
to
you're saying
have
like blue skies, and you have a lightning bolt coming out of nowhere. Yeah.
exactly. So because everybody knows you have to have a cloud to have lightning. Like you
Right.
have to have two points, right? A positive and a negative. So
Mm-hmm.
so people would look up in the sky and say, "Where'd that lightning bolt come from?" It came from the clear blue sky,
Mm-hmm.
And we know that after let's see, if I go back to 1 Kings 18, that after he slaughtered the prophets, he said, okay, I lost it. Hold on one
Yeah,
second.
that's brutal.
It
That he just
says
had them
he
all
told
killed.
Ahab in verse 41, yeah, he just killed them all.
Yeah.
But again, this is judgment. Like a lot of people
And
would
that's
say
where
that
Metallica got the name of their album, "Kill 'Em All." That was their first record.
So 1 Kings 18:41, Elijah told Ahab, go up, go home, eat and drink. I hear the sound of the rushing of rain. So Ahab went home, and Elijah went up to the top of Mount Carmel. So that's the mountain that they were on, which again, it's important they were on a mountain. Why? Because
Mm-hmm.
the gods are on the mountains. You
Yep.
also have lightning strikes on mountains, like,
Yep.
but obviously, the presence of the gods were worshipped on mountains. So he went up to Mount Carmel, he bowed down, and he told his servant, go up now and look toward the sea. and he went and looked toward the sea, and he said, "There's nothing." And so this happened 7 times. And on
Mm-hmm.
the seventh time, he said, "Behold, there's a small cloud, the shape of a man's hand, rising from the sea." And he said, "Go and tell Ahab, prepare your chariot and go down, or the rain will stop you." And so they're kind of saying in this art in this post on Reasons to Believe that,
Mm-hmm.
you know, maybe this lightning bolt was, the miracle might not be God generating lightning or generating fire. It might be him setting things in motion, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so he knew that this was going to be the day the rain was coming. So he pushed this cloud, he sent it on its way towards Mount Carmel.
Mm-hmm.
And at the exact time that Elijah prayed, a bolt from the blue appeared and struck the altar. And that might have been Elijah's clue to know that the rain is coming. So when he tells
Mm-hmm.
Ahab, "I hear the sound of a rushing rain," Elijah knows there's a cloud somewhere.
Here it comes.
And so when he goes up to Mount Carmel and bows down and he says, "Go look towards the sea," they know which way to look because the lightning bolt, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he says, I see the cloud rising from the sea. So it's coming over the horizon.
Yeah.
I guess it depends on how you interpret that. Like, I think a lot of people think it just like levitated up straight up out of the sea. Maybe
Well,
it was like a UFO.
you said in the
But
shape of a man's hand. I've always heard preachers say the size of a man's hand,
yeah,
which would
so
be really weird.
here you have,
Maybe they're holding their hand up and they're like, "Oh yeah, it's about that big."
well, the thing is, the word little is in this. It describes it as a little cloud.
Mm-hmm. So it's just a
So
small
again,
cloud.
are
Something
we
that's
saying
not
like it's
crazy.
literally the size of a man's hand, or
No.
is it far away? Maybe it's coming
Yeah.
over the horizon and he sees it coming.
Yeah.
So again,
I was also saying
that's
like maybe he held his hand up and it like his hand like was the size of the cloud, him holding his hand up or
yeah,
something.
yeah.
Um,
So
and
then the
and I want
heavens
to
grew
iterate. I
black
want to
and
say this real quick.
there
A
was
side
rain.
note.
Yep.
What we're again another thing we're not saying is we're not trying to explain away miraculous things that are in the Bible with natural causes.
Right.
Because you can go on the History Channel and God, I watched this and it was so infuriating. And they talked about some of the plagues in Egypt. They're like, well, the Nile turned to blood, but it wasn't really blood. It was this algae that was
Yeah.
far upstream on the Nile. And the algae had a red hue to it. And then when the waters were agitated, the algae floated to the top of the water and it seemed to turn the Nile red. And, it's like this naturalistic explanation. That's not what we're saying. We're saying God can work through the natural in a supernatural way, or like I like what they said, hypernatural.
Right. Right. And that would still be a miracle. Like,
Oh yeah,
it's not happening on its own. Like, this is something God arranged at a very, very
to happen.
specific
Yeah.
time, and he had to communicate with Elijah that this was happening, right?
Mm-hmm.
He told him at the beginning of chapter 18, he said, "Go show yourself to Ahab, and I will send rain upon the earth." So like, Elijah knew it was happening,
Mm-hmm.
you know. But yeah, the context here that it's so there is a natural explanation for it, and that's kind of cool to think about. Um, but also the historical context of Baal being a storm god, and that was kind of the main thing that people were saying. Well,
Yeah.
it's not, it doesn't impress anybody to do lightning because that happens on its own in nature. It's like, well, it can still be a miracle,
Yeah.
but also, well, fire is a miracle. Fire is impressive. Like, God uses fire all the time. Well, I hope that what we've just showed by reading all those scriptures and stuff is that the two ideas are connected. Like, when the presence of God shows up, there's also lightning.
Right.
A lot of times.
And the context around it signifies that it was probably lightning because of all the weather
Right.
elements, the
Right.
elements of weather.
He's having a showdown with the prophet of Baal. And so I tried to explain it to somebody one time this way. I said, if I told you I'm the best basketball player ever, I'm better than Michael Jordan, and you said, prove it, and then I went and I played soccer, that doesn't prove that I'm good at basketball. Even
Right, yeah.
doesn't matter how good I am at soccer.
Mm-hmm.
But they wouldn't prove that I was good at basketball. I'd have to prove that I was good at basketball by playing
Yeah.
basketball. And so God, to show that Baal is not the true God,
Right.
stops
right.
the rain, lets a famine occur, and then sends lightning to ignite the fire on the altar.
Right.
So there is a theological significance here.
Right. And that's the main thing that we're trying to say, at least in this story. It gives it a little more weight and it gives it a little more. It just makes more sense, right?
It
Like
makes it make sense to me.
it makes it make more sense, and it gives a little more weight of why he's doing these things, because it connects to what was happening and what they thought of with the cults of Baal.
Right. And I want to point out, like, if
But
it doesn't,
we don't know about the cults of Baal because we're not taught that. We're
yeah,
just saying, oh, the fire guy came down and burned the altar. Okay, they're
yeah,
done.
yeah. I want to point out too that, like, if it doesn't make sense to you, or if our explanation isn't compelling to you,
Yeah,
it doesn't matter.
yeah. It doesn't
Like,
matter in the end. Yeah.
people are going to heaven thinking that a fireball came down. It doesn't. It literally doesn't change the story.
A tornado of fire came down.
Yeah, I know. Like, I
That's
always just
fine.
pictured it
Whatever.
was like a comet, like a fireball
But
came
that's
down and
okay.
just,
When they get to
you know.
heaven, like God will tell them, "Well, you were wrong. I mean, it was lightning, but
Hey, it might not be though. Like, I'm willing to be wrong. I'm willing to admit that I could be
I'm
wrong on
not.
this.
I'm not willing."
It just doesn't matter. It doesn't
Right.
change the gospel. It
Right.
doesn't
It
change the
doesn't
message
change the
of,
story in any
yeah.
way.
The story is still Yahweh is the one true God,
Exactly. Yeah.
and don't worship Baal, right?
Right. And they still have fire, actual
Yeah,
fire, hit
and there
the
was
altar,
there
like
was still
consume
fire
the
on the
altar.
altar.
Yeah.
There's still fire on the altar.
Licked
So
up all the water and everything.
as far as the Bible using polemics, there's another passage that I didn't read in our list a second ago.
Hmm.
Psalms 29. I totally missed this one, but I really like it. Psalms 29 actually is another example of a polemic against Baal.
Mm.
Not just Baal, but also Yam. Um, and you'll see this a lot in a future episode, because we did several episodes about death and bodies and resurrection and atonement. Josh and I talked about that a couple episodes ago before we had all our guests on. And
What verse? Psalm 29.
I like specifically verse 7, but I'm going to kind of read a little bit before that.
All right.
But yeah, we want to do an episode about death and how Baal is associated with the underworld, and how Psalms 24 actually has this kind of hidden message that it's a polemic against the Canaanite religion. But in Psalms 29, it starts, I'll start in verse 3. It says, "The voice of the Lord is over the waters. The God of glory thunders." Okay, so that's thunder, right? That's storm imagery. And it's associated with the voice of the Lord. So then the Lord is over many waters. The voice of the Lord is powerful. The voice of the Lord is full of majesty. So I want to point out too that, like, when it talks about the waters here, Yam is the word, or I'm sorry, no, this is not Yam. Yam is the sea. This is Mayim. This is the word for waters.
And
So
we just to have that imagery in your mind. Okay, if you're an ancient person, you're looking up at the heavens, in the sky, in the atmosphere. Everything that happens up there, that's the heavens, right?
yeah,
That's up in the heavens. That's where the gods are. So everything
not
that
talking about where you
happens,
go when you die, right?
right? Everything that happens up in that realm, that atmosphere, that's what the gods are doing. So
Yeah.
the thundering voice of the Lord, when they hear thunder, they're like, "Oh, the gods they're doing something. They're speaking, they're playing football up there."
Yeah. Okay. So, yeah, I'll have to talk more about Yam when we do Psalms 24. This is
Yeah.
actually the word for waters. It's not Yam.
What if it was yam?
It is spelled like yam, so you could
Ooh,
in
now I'm
English.
hungry.
I mean, so verse 5. Okay, here's where it starts. We get more storm imagery.
Right.
The voice of the Lord, right, which was thunder a little while ago. It's full of majesty, powerful. It's thunderous. The voice of the Lord breaks the cedars. The Lord breaks the cedars of Lebanon. He makes Lebanon skip like a calf, and Syrian like a young wild ox. Then verse 7, the voice of the Lord flashes forth flames of fire. So what the voice of the Lord was what? A little while ago. It was thunder. And now it's flashing forth flames of fire. And then it says the voice of the Lord shakes the wilderness. The Lord shakes the wilderness of Kadesh. So this is storm imagery. You have thunder, you have waters, you have trees breaking and bending. And then it says the voice of the Lord thunders, and then the voice of the Lord flashes forth flames of fire and shakes the wilderness. So anyway, again, just that association. It's actually using the word fire here. It's using
and
the word
we've
H.
seen. I'm sure we've all seen videos of lightning striking trees, and it just it literally just annihilates them and splits them into pieces, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of the times they catch fire. Like
Yeah.
that's the imagery he's saying,
And
and it
that's what
all
you get here.
associated with lightning.
And I that imagery I find is important, especially the Sinai. When I was reading Exodus 19 earlier, people nowadays, if you don't have that kind of mythological framework
Hmm.
about the appearance of gods, do you realize what it would have been like for Moses and the elders to eat on top of the mountain? It says that they had dinner with God and the angels.
Bro.
I mean, and think about, you have smoke and lightning and just storm, winds going and all this stuff. I think that a lot of times we get this, Jesus is a friend of mine, and
Yeah.
Jesus loves me, and we get
Jesus
this
with the
like
lamb.
sweet, we get this kind
Yeah.
of sweet, Jesus, oh hey
Yeah, he's
buddy,
got the lamb
you
around his
know,
shoulders. Yeah.
yeah. And you don't picture Jesus, because that's who that is. These are Christophanies in the Old
Hmm.
Testament. So
Right.
you don't think of Jesus as this, you know,
Dominant
monstrous,
force. Right. Yeah.
destructive, I don't want to offend anybody with the word monstrous, but like he's just
Right.
this mighty, this, and I think that, like, think about the reaction of the people when lightning, we're saying lightning, but when the
Mm.
fire consumed the altar and they said, the Lord is God, the Lord is God. They're like,
Yeah.
yeah, I would have been saying that too.
Heck
Like,
yeah. Yeah.
God shows up and you have this crazy show of power. I mean,
Hmm. Right when
oh,
Elijah
geez.
called for it.
I can't even imagine what it would be like to stand in God's presence like that. I mean,
Mm.
and all the imagery of people falling on their knees in worship, and can't even, Isaiah, who bows down and can't even look up, and the Lord lifts him up, and like
Hmm.
he's this omnipotent, massive being, and I
Yeah.
think that sometimes we lose that kind of mythological view of
Right.
our God. This is our God. This
Of
is,
what the Bible readers and writers would have thought him to be.
right,
Right.
right. Um, so I don't know. I feel like that kind of ties that topic up real nice.
Yeah. I
I
think it.
had
Yeah.
some I had some passages,
What's
Josh,
the
if you think
what's
we have time.
what's the one in Revelation where it talks about lightning being around his throne? Like it's a
Yep,
part of his aesthetic, really.
it
You know,
is.
if you think
It is.
about like the throne room of God, and there's lightning, there's
Well, and
uh
Ezekiel, like there's all these visions of Yahweh, and
mhm,
he's got thunder and lightning around him all the
mhm,
time. I mean, it's not an uncommon thing.
right. It's a
Um,
motif that was very common in
it
the ancient
is.
world with
It
gods.
is. So when you understand that as a motif, that's why we went through the trouble of reading all those entries in Psalms and stuff. But
Hmm.
and Exodus 19. But when you get that motif of the image and the presence of God and how powerful that is and overwhelming that is, it's not unreasonable for me to see lightning in these other passages,
Right.
like that is an image
Hmm.
that is associated
Communicates
with
a
God.
message. Yeah.
Like when I see lightning, oh, God is doing something,
Hmm. Who are the sons of
Um,
thunder?
oh yeah, that's a New
What was that?
Testament
That was the other
example.
thing.
James and John, the sons of Zebedee.
Yeah.
So there is a New Testament example of fire falling from heaven, and it's when you know they go into a town and the town doesn't welcome them; it kicks them out. And
They get pissed.
James and John says, "Hey Jesus, you want us to call down fire from heaven
Yeah.
on them?" And he says, "You don't know what spirit you're of," or
Yeah.
I might be mixing two. I
He
think you don't know
rebukes
what
them.
spirit you're of is when they asked to sit on the left and right of his throne, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But actually, all those things come together. So Zeus
I
is
think,
associated with lightning, right?
was it like a mocking? He was like calling them sons of thunder because they wanted to call
Yes.
down fire, like
Yeah.
lightning from
And
heaven.
it's pretty clear that they're
Oh.
referencing. Everybody says, well, they're referencing Elijah, right? They're referencing Elijah calling down fire from heaven,
Mm,
like
mm,
he did it in 1 Kings 18. We just read. He did it in 2 Kings 1. That's the one that you pointed out. The message actually translates lightning.
mm,
But there's actually another thing that they're referencing that in I think that's in the book of Luke. Um, when they say, "Do you want us to call down fire from heaven?" They're also referencing a Zeus myth,
mm.
because there's a story where Zeus and I believe it's Hermes, another god, go into a town and they're dressed like
People.
travelers. They're
Yeah.
dressed like vagabonds, and nobody welcomes them in
Mm,
except this one old couple. This old couple takes them in, and Zeus is like, "Hey, you know, nobody here took us in, but you did.
Mhm.
We're actually gods, so
Mhm.
we'll reward you.
We're actually a big deal.
Yeah. So we'll spare you when we destroy the rest of the town. What do you
Mm.
want? And their reward was to be turned into trees or something. I
Mm.
don't get it.
Hallelujah.
But anyway, so they got turned into trees, and then Zeus destroyed the town. Now some versions of the story say I think he flooded it.
Mm.
But calling down fire from heaven is a
Mhm.
way that he would have destroyed this town.
Yeah.
And that's lightning because you're talking about Zeus, you know.
Right. Yeah.
And
That's
so
kind of his thing.
and that's actually what the book of Acts is referencing too. When the town, remember when they
Because
go
they
into the
would have been
town?
very, very familiar with the cult of Zeus.
Right. And
Even the
Paul, who is it? Paul and Barnabas go into a town and they say, "Oh, this must be Zeus." And
yeah,
uh, it's Hermes, right? Or Apollo?
I don't know.
Anyway, one of the other gods. But he said, "Oh, this must be them," and they start giving them food and worshiping them, and they're like, "No, don't worship us." That's referencing this same Zeus
Right.
myth.
Well, even
Um,
Paul quoted one of Zeus's poets, didn't he?
yeah,
He
we are his
quoted,
children. In him we
yeah,
live and
in
move and
him we
have our
live and move
being.
and have our being. Yeah, that was a poem to Zeus or a psalm to Zeus.
Yep,
So he knew all.
an oracle of Zeus.
They knew all about Zeus. They knew all about the other gods and the mythologies.
Yep,
I think if we read the Bible like we would read the Iliad or the myths about Zeus and Prometheus and all these other, I think it would be a better, not that we believe that it's mythical in the modern sense of, oh, it's not real. It's very real. But I think if we read the Bible more like we would read the myths of the other gods, we would do a better service to understanding the Bible in its proper context.
right,
Does
right.
that make sense? I hope people understand what I'm saying.
Yeah, and because we're not saying it's not historically true,
Right,
but like the genre, the myth genre,
right.
is a
Mythic
type of story that
involves
involves
the
gods and
supernatural.
supernatural
Yeah,
beings,
right,
and it
exactly.
also teaches virtues and morals. You
Right.
know, it teaches us how we relate to the gods. Like a lot of these myths, like the one you mentioned about Prometheus, that's actually where they learned. That actually explains why people offer certain sacrifices to Zeus. Prometheus teaches the humans. He actually pranks Zeus. It's a funny story, but
Mm-hmm.
in the myth about Prometheus, that's when humans start offering burn sacrifices to Zeus.
Mm.
And so these myths are teaching us about the gods and how humans relate to the gods. And the Bible is the same thing. I mean, it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't make it historically inaccurate. It's the true myth. It's the myth
Yeah,
that all other myths.
right,
This is
right.
what C.S. Lewis said. It's the myth that all other
That
myths are
is
inspired by.
exactly right.
And so,
It's,
yeah,
if you want to, you can go watch The Chosen. You can go watch, Angel Studios and all the Christian movies about the Bible. If you really want to get an accurate, culturally significant view of the ancient world, go watch Clash of the Titans. Go watch Clash of the Titans and Wrath of the Titans. That's
yeah.
more along the lines of what the Bible looks like.
What's the one? Wasn't Christian Bale in one? The Gods of Egypt or
Oh, the
something?
gods! I didn't like that one. That was stupid.
Okay.
Dude, Clash of the Titans, the remake or whatever, so crazy. But
Yeah,
it deals with all of that imagery. It deals with all of that mythical god imagery, and it's superb.
yeah. Because I feel like we're kind of winding down here,
Mm-hmm.
I want to plug the Lord of Spirits podcast
Yes,
because they
definitely.
actually have an episode. If anyone's more interested in this topic, they have an episode about lightning gods.
Mm-hmm.
I believe the title is Thunder Gods and the God Who Thundered,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a reference to Baal and Zeus and Thor versus Yahweh, right?
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, but they actually go into some of this cultural significance. They discuss Baal, they discuss Zeus, they discuss Thor, and then
Yeah.
they discuss Yahweh.
Right.
And they actually mention some of the things that we've mentioned tonight, some of the same things, but they go
Yeah.
more into some of what the mythological and cultural beliefs about those gods were. So if anyone is more interested in learning about that
Kind of the
context,
mythical side of the Bible in that
yeah,
story
go
specifically too.
go find that episode of Lord of
Yeah,
Spirits.
it's
They have an
great stuff.
excellent podcast. There,
Yeah,
now,
he actually mentions it in passing. He talks about Elijah's confrontation. He's
yeah,
like, "Yeah, that was lightning."
Yeah.
moving on,
He
and then he
says
goes on to like the different
he
thing.
says
I'm
something
what?
like, "If I can ruin your Sunday school,
Yeah, your flannel graph image in your mind,
yeah." But they
bruh.
have an excellent podcast. So they're,
Oh yeah, very
in
good.
case no one's ever heard us mention them before, they are Orthodox. I think Antiochian. I might be wrong, but they're some form of Orthodox Christian. It's Father Stephen DeYoung and Father Andrew Stephen
Andrew.
Damick,
Yeah.
and their podcast is excellent. It's excellent.
Right. Yep.
So
Yep. Very, very good stuff.
yeah, man.
Well, Ryan, I think we've done our lightning round, and it's time
Yeah,
to wrap it up. It was fire, bro.
it was fire, or
Or was it fire?
It was electric.
It was not fire. It was not lit. Actually, it was lit. It wasn't fire. That's, as the kids say. You can show this episode to your teenagers, and they will love it.
Yeah, and I didn't get to read my other passages about words that are translated wrong in the Bible, so we'll have to do that another time. Because we explained the lightning and fire thing and
Right,
Aish and Barak, but I've got a whole list of, like, for people who say the English translators are inspired. I've got some words that
Yeah,
we don't know what they mean.
They
So-
made mistakes. Every human makes mistakes.
I do think the Lord is able to preserve His word, but I
But
think
God-
people abuse
yeah,
that.
God does
so-
guide, and He corrects
Yeah.
and makes sure
Yeah.
things get done the way He wants them, which makes it more miraculous.
Yeah,
Because if He was to come down and just do it the way He wanted and it was done, you're like, okay, yeah, that makes sense because He's God. But He chooses to work through fallible human beings and still get
yeah.
his point across and what He wanted. What was the thing that Heiser had an example about that? Like, if God, like if you're playing chess and God is like making your moves for you to win, he's like, that would be one thing. But he's like, but God works through you, your choices, you're making the choices, but God
Yeah.
still gets what He wants in the
Well,
victory at the end.
Yeah, that analogy is in the context of predestination.
Right.
He says a master chess player doesn't tell a novice, I've decided every move you're going to make.
Right, yeah.
He says, no matter what move you make, I can win.
I'll still
So,
win, yeah.
Uh,
Which makes it more miraculous.
so, I don't know. I want to read these so bad, but I feel like we need to end.
Okay.
Let me just tease. I'll just put this
yeah,
teaser out.
yeah. Give us a
The
teaser
ones,
trailer.
in case anybody wants to look these up. The word ayin in Ezekiel 1, where it says that the wheels were full of eyes, or that, or Ezekiel 10 that the cherubim were full of eyes.
Well, that connects to the
biblically accurate
angels that is so freaking annoying. If you've
My-
ever been on TikTok or Instagram and you see those stupid memes, this is what a real angel looks like. And
Yeah.
it's this big monstrous wheel with eyes
And
all over
everybody
it.
says,
and
no
it's
wonder
like,
they
oh
were
my God,
terrified
here
and
we go.
scary. Like, be not afraid. You know,
Be not afraid. That's why, because they
Yeah.
were so crazy looking. No, it's not.
Well, there's good evidence that word should not be translated eyes. It should be translated stars.
Uh-oh.
Okay, because they're
Ryan,
constellations.
it says eyes.
It says eyes. I know.
It says fire.
It says eyes.
In the English translation, it says fire.
The other one that I was going to say, I had it earlier, and I forgot.
And then they say, like, the Bible says eyes.
yeah,
It's like, okay.
yeah.
Yeah, it does.
There's a pretty funny one when Job mentions the behemoth. He says that its tail, it makes its tail straight like a cedar, and the sinews of its loins are tightly knit. That's actually a fertility reference. It's not talking about his tail and his loins. So,
but I was told it was a hippopotamus.
I know. I was told it was like a brontosaurus. So.
And a dragon and a dinosaur.
Yeah. Or the Leviathan's a crocodile, you know.
It's kind of like the head covering. It's like,
So there's good evidence that it's talking about, it's making a fertility reference. It's making a middle school joke.
Bro.
And then and one of my personal favorites is I like to tell people there's a Pokemon battle in the Bible that when Moses is at the burning bush, it says throw your staff down and it'll become a Nakash, which is the word for snake.
Serpent, yeah.
But then whenever he goes to Pharaoh, God tells Moses, throw your staff down and it's going to become a Tanin, which is more than a snake.
Dragon, huh?
It's a monster. It's a sea monster.
Like a monster snake.
So a lot of scholars say, well, maybe it turned into a crocodile. It's like, I don't know. I think it was Gyarados or Charizard or something, you know?
I think it was a mini dragon. But the cool thing is that he throws the staff down, it becomes the snake, dragon, serpent thing,
The
whatever
fact
it was.
that it becomes an animal at all is
Yeah,
crazy.
I think it was probably a giant cobra, like an Egyptian cobra.
Yeah, but then it says that the magicians did the same thing, and
Right, they're
Moses or Aaron's
magicians.
snake ate the other snakes.
Right, yeah.
Um,
That was
but this
the
one's
first
really
Pokemon
interesting
battle.
because you can't exactly. That's what I said. I tell everybody,
Charizard
did you know
versus
there's a Pokemon
Bulbasaur.
battle in the Bible? So the thing.
What
the reason,
if he cast it down and the snake had like arms and it was like giant arms and he was like,
Yeah.
all right, let's go. It's like a monster snake.
But the reason that one's interesting is because the people who would say, well, it says snake. It's the word for snake. It says
Yeah.
snake. And it's like, yeah, but it actually uses two different words for snake. Like at the burning bush, he says, your staff is going to become a nakash,
Mhm.
which is like a snake.
And it's
But
referencing
then,
back to Genesis 3, the same.
no, well, no. Yeah, yeah.
Well, I mean, it's like,
it is a snake.
okay,
Yes,
is it a
yes.
serpent or is it a spiritual being?
Yeah. Moses' staff didn't turn into an angel for sure. But yeah, that's just the common word for snake.
That would have been really dope.
But then whenever he goes to Pharaoh, he says, throw your staff down and it's going to become a tanin. And I just kind of picture Moses being like,
What? A Tanin?
this is not how we rehearsed it.
Wait, a monster? He got this getting bigger. He got an upgrade.
Yeah, man.
He got an upgraded snake.
There's some other good ones. But that the only reason I give those examples is to say that like a lot goes into Bible translation. It's not easy. Translators have a difficult job.
Right, they have a very difficult job.
It is not unfaithful of us to research and to look deeper.
Sure.
As long as we're not finding things like Jehovah's Witnesses changed John 1 to say that the word was a God.
A God, yeah.
Or that I think it's in...
That was the New World Translation, I think.
Yeah.
It said they put a God in there.
Yep. And then is it in Hebrews? No. Which epistle is it where it says through him, it says by him, the Father made all things. And it's talking about by the Son, God made all things. But they change it to he made all other things because they think the Father created the Son first.
Right.
And by the Son, he created all other things.
Right.
So like that's different. That changes
Words
our
are very
theology.
important. Right. Yeah.
So none of these words change our theology. You know,
Yeah,
this is
not at all.
but anyway,
But
so
it does give a little more 2020 vision on context.
Yeah. Yep.
And who they're dealing with. So yeah. Well, we hope that blessed you. All the 3 people that listened all the way through. It is really important stuff. It seems insignificant, but it's not. It's very important, really, how we interpret the Bible.
I hope it just, whether you agree with us or not, I hope it encourages people just to read their Bible and study more.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, because at the end of the day, your relationship to God and what you think about God is that's the quote, right? Who said it? That's the most important thing about you.
Yep.
But anyway, seek truth, you know, study the Word of God.
Yeah, and study the context when the Bible was written, because it will give you so much more insight.
Yeah.
You'd be like, oh, okay, that's probably what they were thinking about when this was written. But,
well, Josh,
we're stuck in our social media. I got to get on TikTok and start swiping away. Don't get your theology from TikTok. It's so bad. Yeah. It's a wasteland of theology.
Yeah. I wish I could remember what my other example was for a word that's translated wrong. I had 4 of them.
Oh well. You got 10 seconds to come up with it. Nah,
we're good. We'll save it for later.
All right, sounds good. Well, Ryan, that concludes our episode on lightning and fire. And it was good. Yeah. Thanks.
I hope everyone enjoyed it. You know, I can imagine maybe some people aren't as nerdy as us and didn't like all that, but hey, it's good, man. It's good stuff. So,
all right,
Josh. It's been a pleasure talking with you.
Adios.